Hello, everyone. Welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We're here for another hour-long session to answer your gardening questions and talk about what's happening out there in our own gardens. My name is Candice Hart. I am the State Master Gardener Specialist located here in central Illinois, and I'm here with my fellow hort colleagues today. Who do we have today?
Yes, my name is Kelly Allsup, and I'm a horticulture educator also based out of Bloomington, Illinois. And my specialty, I love growing vegetables and herbs, and I love insects. Mm-hmm. If you've not met me before, I like the pollinators, the beneficial insects, the pests. I always have something to say about them. So ask me your pest questions for sure.
Bring them on.
And I'm Ryan Pankau, horticulture educator here in Champaign County. My specialty is probably all the woody plants, so nice. Trees, shrubs, things like that. I also am very much a vegetable gardener, so that's another area that I like to work in.
Awesome. Okay, well, feel free to add your gardening questions into the comment box at any point. We're going to start by talking about kind of what we're doing in our gardens this time of year. My specialty, I didn't really mention it, is certainly flowers and ornamentals and landscape plants. So we brought along some tropicals today, and I've got some photos that we're going to pull up of just different tropicals and tropical looking plants that you can kind of mix into either your containers or your landscaping to kind of give it just a different feel from your typical like impatiens and petunias, your typical kind of annuals. So I've got some pictures of a couple different landscape examples. Persian shield is one that has a really cool purple leaf pattern that I love that kind of has a tropical feel. Popcorn plant with those yellow flowers. I took this picture actually at a children's garden because when you put your hand over a popcorn plant and you smell it, it smells like popcorn. Mm-hmm. It's a really cool plant.
And you're starting to see more availability of seed and plants.
Exactly. Before you kind of had to find it at a really good specialized greenhouse, but I think because it's so cool, it's becoming more popular. So check out that. Elephant ears are the next two. This is one that you can buy the corm or the bulb. You can buy it at the garden center, plant it in the ground, and you'll get these really big, huge leaves that'll come out. So in the middle of a container or in the landscaping, they just have a really cool tropical feel to them. And then, of course, you have cannas. I've talked about canna before, how we store it for the winter and bring it outside, but it has that really cool tropical large size to it. And then something like a banana, too. You can plant a banana plant in a container. And the cool thing about most of these tropicals or tropical-looking things is that you can save them. So you can bring them in at the end of the season. If you have a garage with a window or a basement, something like that, you can kind of keep them going for next year. And then we brought a couple things today. A couple other tropicals you could add in would be things like croton. Croton is, of course, a great houseplant for the rest of the year. But just the great color on croton is perfect for putting outside. ZZ plant has a really cool tropical look to it that's super easy to grow. And then we had some peperomia here too with these kind of rounded leaves. So anything that's a tropical that you have as a houseplant, you can certainly take outside for the summer, either plant it in a bed or put it in a container and just kind of give a whole different look to your garden.
And that's what my front steps, I have 4 little areas in the front of my house is I'm going to do crotons because I love how bright and colorful they are. And then I'm going to do the asparagus Ming fern. People call it different things.
Yeah.
And because I love the way it grows all crazy. And this one's actually going up into my blinds right now. So
needs to be divided a little.
I'm going to have 2 of those on each side and 2 of the crotons right in front.
Yeah. That's what I tend to do too, is either do tropicals, like kind of houseplant type things on my front because it's not full sun, it's kind of filtered light a little bit. Or in the full sun spots, I'll do a lot of succulents because then I don't have to water them very much and they love that.
And then you just take them in the winter.
Then bring them into the garage,
your
or
house
basement,
plants.
Put them wherever. Yeah, awesome. Well, keep putting those questions into the comment box. We'll get to those here pretty soon. But Kelly, what do you got going out in the garden?
Well, I'm ready to plant my tomatoes, and so right now I have 2 really large tree pots. that I've planted some beets in, and I'm going to plant my tomato in the middle of it, because by the time I harvest my beet greens, my tomato's going to be ready to go.
Nice.
So just a few rules about tomatoes. 10 hours of sun. Absolutely require 10 hours of sun. If you have plants that aren't doing well or plants that don't produce fruit, that's your problem.
Sun.
Not enough sun.
Need lots of sun.
A lot of people space their tomatoes too close together. 2 to 3 feet apart. Almost necessary for you to get good tomato growth.
So you're gonna do one in each pot, right? In its own pot.
Yeah,
right? For
one.
yours.
My
No
big
way you could do
landscape,
more.
one
Yeah.
plant only in the middle.
Yeah, I'm guilty of too tight a spacing on tomato plants,
Yeah.
but it does cause a lot of other problems other than the plant just not having enough room to grow.
Mm-hmm.
There's disease issues and other
There's
things.
less
that
air
it can
movement.
cause,
There's
so.
lots of stuff.
And
So
you don't.
it's really hard when they're this small, though, to have them 3 feet apart,
Uh-huh.
but you really have to be disciplined on that.
I know when I do container gardens all the time, people are like, they look so puny. I'm like, oh, just wait.
Give it some time.
Then, tomatoes you have to have consistent watering with tomatoes. And then there are heavy feeder vegetables. So you want to start off with a starter fertilizer, and then you want to fertilize again when it starts to fruit, and then again every 4 weeks. And that will keep them growing well. But now I also wanted to demonstrate how to plant a tomato. So I have a beautiful tomato right here, and it is a little tall, but still very good to plant. Tomatoes are vines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant my tomato up to here. I'm going to dig that hole deep. I'm going to take all these leaves off below.
Another thing that's hard to do.
I know. It's
pick the
oh,
leaves off
all
the
these good leaves.
And there's going to be roots coming from where I put the leaves off. Now this will make a much sturdier, stable plant if you plant this way from the very beginning.
And do you plant it straight or at an angle? What do you
I
prefer?
usually plant it straight. If you can't dig your hole that deep, then you plant it at an angle where you can plant it like this. But I'll plant my hole, this deep, and I will bury it up to here.
Nice.
Because it's a vine and it'll have roots along the entire stem. Okay, another thing that I do with my tomatoes is I pinch out the little side shoots. And so I have a nice little demonstration here. So usually you'll hear horticulturists say, I grow 1, 2, 3 liters, which means this is your 1 liter. You only want 1, 2, or 3 of them to grow throughout the season, because then you will have less fruits, but you'll have bigger, more substantial fruits. And so what I do is, especially in the beginning, is I'll pinch out these side shoots. So right here we see a leaf is connected to the stem. Now there's this little shoot trying to come out right here. And I'm going to go ahead and pinch that shoot out. And I'm going to do that consistently for at least the first 4 to 6 weeks. Sometimes after a while it gets a little much. But, people who grow tomatoes for a living, they do this constantly. I'm also going to take off those flower buds, because I don't care if it flowers and fruits right now. It's going to take me about 60 days, 90 days maybe to get some good fruits. And then I'm going to, again, plant it deep.
Well, and by pinching those flower buds off, you save some energy for all the
Yeah,
growth
you really
that
want
you
it to get root and get established.
I know people. I have my nutrition. The nutrition program coordinator was like, "Oh, if you take off flower buds, it puts all this energy into root growth." She's like, "What does that mean?"
Means
In
what
the
it
beginning,
sounds.
it's all about roots.
Yeah.
You want roots to grow.
Yeah.
Good roots equals good shoots. So think about that. It's all about roots in the beginning. So, and then another thing that people consistently do not do is stake their tomatoes.
Oh yeah, you gotta.
You have to stake those tomatoes. You can't let them grow on the ground, because then you have those disease problems and you have insect issues that you're unable to see and control. And then there is nothing worse than seeing a big, beautiful red tomato that's rotted from the bottom from laying on the ground.
Touching the soil. Yeah.
Do you stake them right away, or do you wait a little
I
bit?
do stake them right away. I never wait.
Me too.
Just because, you wait, it's beyond.
Then it gets too big and you can't get it all there.
So I always stake them right away. I'm actually doing some staking experimentations this summer with tomatoes, which I will submit pictures throughout the summer to show you guys my experiment. I'm doing 3 different methods. I'm building my own cages with woven wire, and I'm going to build them 8 feet up.
Holy moly.
Yes.
On your container, or are you putting those
On my
the ground?
container. Well, the experiment is in the ground.
Okay, that's what I
On my containers, I'm lucky enough to have these really amazing
you have like metal ones.
yes, that
strong
cost me
ones.
$25. And so the ones I'm not trying to take away business from garden centers, but the little flimsy ones you buy in the garden centers do not work. Then I'm going to experiment with the Florida weave, which means you put stakes and then you wrap string around and you start weaving your tomatoes up through that string so it keeps them off the ground. And then I'm going to also, try some of the more heftier tomatoes, and then I'm actually going to use those tomato cages that you buy in the store and compare to see what kind of differences I'm actually going to get. Am I going to get more tomatoes from the ones that I've properly staked? Mm-hmm. Am I going to have less disease pressures, less insect issues? I'm just trying to do a little bit of experimentation with this. And so stake your tomatoes.
Cool, and stay tuned for the results.
Yeah, I'm gonna show you my results. I'm even gonna weigh my produce throughout the season to see if staking has something to do with
your yield.
My yield.
I like that.
Very
Get some
cool.
data.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
So I see you have a Cherokee
nice.
purple here. What is that a favorite variety, or do you have some favorite varieties?
I love Cherokee purple.
That's a good one. Yeah,
And Candice and I just noticed this.
we were looking at it.
Cherokee purple is an heirloom. It's this big, hefty purple tomato. Oh, it tastes so good. It's so luscious. I love the consistency of it.
Mm-hmm.
But we noticed here that this is actually a grafted tomato. So, which means that the top part is a different kind of tomato than the root portion. Mm-hmm. So they've been kind of fused together. And the bottom portion is, I don't know what it is, but it's probably some non-heirloom variety that has more disease resistance and is able to mine the soil better. Okay, spread its roots better in the soil. And then the top is the heirloom part. So then I get those Cherokee purples, but I also have a better. It makes it grow better. Yeah. Can you add on to that?
Which is good, because a lot of times with heirlooms you have disease problems and they don't grow quite as easily as some of the more hybrid stuff, right?
Yeah, it's kind of the best of both worlds. I mean, it's done a lot with woody vegetation where you want different characteristics in your rootstock than you do in the above ground growth. Yeah. So that's what you get, is a really vigorous and strong disease-resistant root.
Smart.
Roots, type of roots. Yeah. And then the top is the fruits that we want.
Yeah, so. And it shouldn't matter that you're planting the graft union deep, right?
I was thinking that too. Yeah. Am I messing up the graft union by planting it so deep? I mean, I'm gonna have to research that.
Well, I don't think you will so much, because you're only gonna get really root growth coming out of here. You might just have to watch for suckers that come out at the base and pull those off. Because we talk about that a lot with fruit trees. Like if you have a grafted apple tree, you want to make sure the graft union's above the soil, so that the rootstock doesn't start to grow and take over. So that's interesting.
Or because the top growth can start to have its roots
its own roots out.
That'll be more susceptible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's something to research for sure.
Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know the answer to that either.
We'll have to find out. Well, keep those questions coming in. We're going to start answering those here in a second. If you have any gardening questions, shoot them in the comment box. Ryan, what's going on?
Well, I thought I would talk a little bit about the world of woody vegetation and what might be going on this time of year. This is definitely the main planting season, one of the main planting seasons for the year. You know, now in the spring and the fall are probably the times that are best to plant woody plants. Not to say you couldn't do that in the middle of summer. You'll just be watering more. You know, like we talked about with these tomatoes, root growth is the big key to getting them out of transplant shock. So if you can plant now, actually I really prefer planting a little earlier in spring because you can capitalize on this cooler weather we have and more rainfall. Rainfall continues into the summer, but as the temperature heats up, then all these plants need that much more water that you have to provide to them. So if you are planting a tree, there's definitely, or a shrub, there's some guidelines to follow. The main guideline of which, for me anyway, is to keep that root flare, or the basal flare of the trunk, where it starts to flare out, keep that at the soil line. And that's a tricky thing to do. I didn't have a great picture of this to add to our stuff today, but a lot of times that's actually down in the container or the balled and burlapped, you know, part of the roots. Sometimes they're containerized a little deep, so it's hard to find that. And so if you dig your hole the depth of the container or the ball of the plant, then when you actually plant it, that you know, root flare can be down in your hole, and you don't want that. So
don't necessarily follow what the garden center's done necessarily.
Yeah, so I tend to plant my plants a lot pretty high, you know, that keep that root ball up and high, and because the last thing we want to do is cover up any of that basal flare, because that's an important transition zone between, you know, the conductive tissue of the upper trunk and the conductive tissue in the roots. And it's probably something in the last 20 or 30 years the field of arboriculture has come to really understand. You can cause a lot of problems by having soil or mulch piled up against that. So mulch is another topic that comes up a lot of times this time of year, whether you're planting a new tree or you're reapplying mulch around other trees. It's really an essential for planting a new tree because it's going to capture moisture. It's going to do a lot of, you know, good stuff for the tree. But there's definitely a right and a wrong way to do that. One of the wrong ways that you can apply mulch is what we call a mulch volcano. So, awesome, you know, not quite as explosive as that volcano, but a mulch volcano is just a pile of mulch that you get up against the trunk. You'll see this if you really start, you know, really having a critical eye for mulch when you travel around. You'll start to see these all over the place. So what happens when you do that is you're covering up that root flare. You're promoting a lot of problems. You know, the moisture's trapped in there. That just those basic physiological processes of transferring nutrients and water up and down the trunk can't happen. We now know there's actually photosynthesis that goes on in that, you know, cambium, the cork cambium tissue or the bark tissue. So you're limiting some of that. So it's really important that you don't do that. I think we do have a picture of a correctly mulched tree that I kind of refer to as a donut, as opposed to a volcano on the bad side. You know, a donut is really kind of what you're going for on the good side, where it's nicely pulled away from the basal flare. You don't have it up against the trunk. It is a little bit of a maintenance issue to kind of keep that area cleaned out, but really want to keep that mulch back away from the trunk and kind of in that donut arrangement on top of the roots, or where the roots are going to grow is where you want the mulch. So
donut, not muffin.
Right? Yeah. Donut, not a muffin. I
say bagel, not a muffin.
Bagel, donut.
Bagels are probably a little healthier than donuts.
Probably.
So as far as what else might be going on in the world of woody plants, a lot of things we aren't going to be pruning right now. So any trees or anything, we're going to let all those leaves fully emerge and get a little photosynthesis going for the year before we'd ever start really pruning. But the one exception to that rule is some of our spring flowering shrubs. So, you know, things like forsythia, lilac, viburnum that have flowered. Many of those have kind of already flowered.
My Bradbury spirea is going crazy right now.
Yes, and the spireas. I've got some 9-barks that are in mid-flower. So you really need to wait till flowering's done to prune those. But now is the time of year that you would prune those immediately after flowering, because they actually will have to put on those flower buds throughout the growing season. So a lot of plants, with respect to health care for the plant and other things we want to prune during dormancy, these spring flowering shrubs are kind of the exception when you're pruning for flowering, because if we had pruned them in the wintertime, which is the dormant period, it's probably best for most other plants to prune, we'd prune off a bunch of those flower buds.
And you don't want to do that.
So if you prune them right after flowering, they'll have all the rest of this growing season to put those buds on and store them over the winter to bloom really nicely next spring. So, so that would be another maintenance or care issue to be thinking about this time of year. But again, we're about midway through all the regular progression of the spring flowering shrubs. So.
Cool. So does it kill you when you walk around and see all these deeply planted trees?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I even driving in my car, I get criticism from that from passengers, but I'm always looking at trees and woody vegetation while I'm driving around, and that's one of the things sitting at stoplights or other places you can see is that tree looks like a telephone pole going into the ground, and meaning it doesn't have any kind of
Can't
flare.
See the flare.
Just going into the ground like a telephone pole, and that flare's buried, and I can tell you that's going to prolong transplant shock. I've seen a lot of trees that are 5-6 years old and are still in transplant shock because of the fact that they were planted so deep. Mm-hmm. You can go in and pull that soil gently back, but sometimes you get so deep into the ground, you have a real bowl shape there that becomes a maintenance issue, keeping the soil and mulch out of that hole. So it does really bug me.
And you got to be careful. No, go ahead.
Better to plant too high.
Yes.
Even though planting too high can wick away some of the moisture, but it's better to plant too high in the beginning than to plant too deep.
Because it's going to settle some too, even after you plant. So.
Yeah. I'm always planting too high. A lot of people, it amazes a lot of people at how high I've planted this tree. But I mean, really, for a planting hole, you want shallow and wide as opposed to deep and narrow. Yeah. So, all that area that you loosen up that's really wide in your planting hole is what all those roots are going to grow into. Yeah, it's a good area for roots, And if you look at where the roots of a tree are in the soil profile, they're up in that upper, 8 to 12, mostly in the top 12 inches of soil. So, that's where most of your root growth is. Mm-hmm. So if you're making your hole really wide, you only need to dig it about this deep, but really wide, so then it has all that loosened soil to develop roots into. That's maybe another important aspect of watering is to ensure that you water some of that area as well. You're not just watering the ball that you planted, but that area around it to draw the roots out into that area.
Very cool. Well, and I was going to mention, too, you got to be careful about your landscaping around those trees, too. In my first house that I moved into, 2 weeks after I moved in, I had a probably 20-30 foot maple just come right out of the ground. Ooh. Because in a windstorm, because the previous owner, they'd put landscaping brick around it and had layered it up, so there was probably 12 inches of soil stacked up around the base of the tree. So and essentially then was planted too deeply and it just rotted. Yeah. So you don't want to add soil so you can plant stuff. You want to make sure that flare is still there.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. Good point.
Cool. We'll keep those questions coming into the comment box. We've got some great ones coming in. Carla said she didn't know that she needed this, but she did. So thanks for watching, Carla. Hopefully we're giving you some good info here. So let's start with a question about some fruits here. Lois says she's ready to pull out all of her blackberries and raspberries because the Japanese beetles foul them up so bad. And that is definitely the truth. Doesn't seem to be anything safe to spray with. Any other suggestions? Japanese beetles on brambles.
My plan with Japanese beetles is always to get after them as early as possible, and I hand pick them off. And getting that bucket of soapy water and just walking around and.
I think that is the secret. Is what happens is when they feed, they put off a feeding hormone. And then they have an aggregation hormone that says, hey, everybody, there's food over here.
Come over here.
So another thing, in addition to getting those Japanese beetles, earlier in the morning and later at night, they tend to be a little bit more lethargic. So you just knock them into the soapy bucket of water. Soapy bucket of water. Bucket of soapy water. Excuse me.
You got the idea.
But pinching off that leafy foliage, even though sometimes that can be a real pain, it's a way to get them to stop coming. So if you really, really attack this problem in the first couple of weeks, you'll have less issues throughout the 6 weeks that they are feeding on your raspberries and blackberries.
That's a good point. Get it early. Yeah.
Another thing is even though what I'm doing for instance, I have flea beetles on some eggplant, and the flea beetles are already out and they're just eating things up. You would think that it would wait a little bit longer, but they're already out. So I'm covering them with row covers,
Yeah.
just to try to prevent a little bit more of that damage. And you could cover those plants for just 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, the start when they start coming out.
When the Japanese beetles start coming out and trying to prevent them from eating that foliage. And I know that prevents pollination, and I'm not sure offhand I'm sure blackberries and
Would have already
raspberries
been pollinated by the time.
I would think you'd be good by then.
Yeah,
So-
but exclusion is like the one surefire bet without
Yeah.
a chemical that you're gonna
Yeah.
get control.
So I wouldn't give up, Lois. I would.
but don't think we're dismissing you.
Yeah.
Japanese beetles are a huge issue.
They're a huge pain.
They're a huge issue for growers, for people who run orchards, for gardeners and homeowners. And you know what I always say is don't grow stuff that attracts Japanese beetles. People hate it when I say that, but I think we're kind of going towards that. Or, like Ryan says, have a plan from the very beginning.
Start early.
Yeah, from day
and just
one.
know that it's going to happen.
I mean, when you see the first one, you've got to be after it. Yeah, another tip maybe if you are going to go the exclusion route is just to kind of keep your shrubs a little smaller. Really work on your winter pruning to promote the the fruit bearing canes on the plant and taking out some of those older ones.
Yeah.
That's maybe another tip because a smaller shrub is easier to exclude than a big woolly one.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, we did lots of cane pruning at the food forest at Bloomington. Well, Bill, our local foods systems educator, did that, and I was pretty impressed with how much he took back. So he just really left. This is in late winter. He really left like 4 canes behind,
you can take a lot.
and he took them back to like 3 or 4 feet.
Yeah. They grow so much.
They do. It doesn't hurt them. Once the root system's established. Now, I have probably 4 or 5 brand new raspberry shrubs I planted last year. They had a season of growth, and I'm not doing it. I'm kind of letting them just kind of grow for the year.
Exactly.
So once that root system is established, man, especially on raspberries, they are just so prolific.
They go crazy, yeah. Well, so hopefully that helps you out, Lois. I would say don't give up yet. Just get on them early and see how you do. Sue has a question here. She has a viable ornamental sweet potato left over from last season to replant. Do I cut it in pieces with a couple eyes, I think is what she meant to say, each? Should I let it dry, use a fungicide? What should she do? Normally with the sweet potato, you go for slips. So you take that sweet potato and you kind of plant it in a moist media, like sand or potting mix. And then you let it kind of sprout this new growth that comes out that are the slips, and then you pull those off and plant them. So that's probably what I would do. Like any other sweet potato is to, like I said, kind of put it in a moist media, wait for some growth to start, and then gently pull those off and replant.
And then those are what you reroot in your garden. Yep.
What do you
If
think?
it were a sweet potato vine, I would just take tip cuttings.
If it has growth, yeah.
If it's still growth.
Yeah, it sounds like she just has the sweet potato itself.
Oh, okay.
It's my guess. But if not, then if you got foliage, then take some cuttings for sure. Because they would root very easily. Absolutely.
I'm sorry. There's this roly-poly
I was
right
going to ask you to
he's
talk
struggling.
about it. I was going to ask you to talk about it.
He's struggling, and I want to turn him over so bad.
Well, you know what I noticed last week when I planted a bunch of stuff in my raised beds? There
he goes.
They were everywhere. There was a ton of pill bugs in my
They
raised
love
beds.
moisture.
Yeah. So, and we've had all that rain. So like, oh my gosh, there's so many pill bugs. Well, we saved them.
Pill bugs eat their own poop.
Oh,
well, so
nice.
how do they rate as good, bad, ugly? How do they rate?
They're great.
World?
They're breaking down organic matter. They're pooping. That's what we need.
Do they chew on any leaves? Do they do any holes in leaves?
No.
Cool.
No.
Yeah, I've always viewed them as not really doing.
No, they're
awesome.
And they're fun. They just probably came off of the plants, so they're fine. They're not
they were
damaging
in
the plants at all.
Cool. Okay, we've got to keep your questions coming into the comments there. We've got a question from Melanie here. Besides lemongrass, what else can I use in my yard or garden to control mosquitoes without using chemicals? What do you think?
Oh, I can answer this question for sure.
Okay, what do you got?
unless you have a forest of lemongrass, you're not controlling mosquitoes. Or you're constantly rubbing it on you. I think it's cool to grow plants to get rid of mosquitoes, but no, they're not going to protect you. One thing that you can do that I think is just really good tips is, of course, you're going to make sure there's no standing water on your property at all. With all this rain, everybody get out there. Water in pots, water on it, wherever you find water, dump it, because you are breeding those mosquitoes. That is the best thing that you can do. Another thing that you can do is eat. Mosquitoes are actually really weak flyers. If you're sitting outside at a barbecue or just in the backyard and you had a fan going and the fan was directed at you, that would be enough to get them to not be around you.
That's a good one.
That's an easy thing to do.
Another thing is you need to protect yourself with DEET. And it's one of the proven things. You have to protect yourself from mosquitoes. They do carry human diseases and can be a potential health threat. So you can, make sure you put that DEET on. You can even put DEET on really young children. My doctor just told me that I could put DEET on my 4-month-old. Of course, it scares me a little bit, but I put DEET on myself and know that you have to reapply it after a couple of hours. But I cannot, nothing ruins the backyard like mosquitoes. But are there other plants that have like mosquito repellent properties? Yeah, scented geraniums are a really good one. But if you really want it, like I'm in a forest of scented geraniums. Like, you have a back porch. just go out and buy like 50 of them. And you might help your mosquito
And it's
population.
really the oils inside. So if the plant's just sitting there, it's not really emitting the oil. You really got to break it open.
You'd be rubbing that plant, rubbing it, keep rubbing the leaves. But
so that's why it would take a forest to put out enough of the repellent. That makes sense.
So you really, I wish I could say something that we could plant to get rid of mosquitoes. Again, this is like the Japanese beetle ones where we're like, wah, wah.
Sorry.
but
really getting rid of that standing water.
Getting rid of that standing water is the best thing you can do for mosquito populations. And cleaning out your gutters.
Oh, yeah, good point. Because then water can stand if you have, Great question. Keep them coming in the comments there. We've got a couple of questions recently about Japanese maples, and Karen posted a photo for us in the event earlier today. She's got a Japanese maple with a crack going down the trunk. What do we think? Is it going to make it? Is she going to be okay? We looked at the picture ahead of time.
So it's probably a frost crack. They're very thin barked. And so what happens with that is on a sunny winter day, it's been really cold all night. The sun comes out and shines on that trunk and then causes this crack to develop from the rapid change in temperature. You can protect from that with a wrap in the wintertime. There's a lot of different products out there. My favorite is kind of like a brown paper bag looking wrap. It's pretty lightweight. It definitely needs to come off because just like we discussed, with the mulch volcanoes and things, you don't want to really be constricting that trunk or have anything around it. So by the time it starts to leaf out and everything, you'd want to pull that off. But that can protect from future frost cracking. Now, as far as the frost crack you have, is it spell doom for your Japanese maple? I say a good way to judge that is how well did it leaf out this year? Does it have a nice full canopy? Does it have some dead spots? Because what that crack has done to the trunk is disrupted some of that conductive tissue. With the tree, all of the arteries and veins, so to speak, or the conductive tissue is just right inside the bark, right around the outer edge of the tree. So when you get a crack to develop like that, it's disrupted that tissue. So it just limits the tree's ability to transport nutrients up and down the trunk and water. The extent of the crack, has a lot to do with how much it impacts the plant, how much of that tissue is affected. The nice thing about frost crack is that it's very vertical. You know, it goes up and down. What's really a problem is when you get more of a horizontal disruption, you know, or a girdling action, so to speak.
Yeah,
so,
if it's only on one side of the tree, it's not as bad.
So yeah, one side of the tree, one crack, I think you might be okay if you're seeing good you know, leaf development and everything else this spring. If you watch that crack, your tree should start to develop what we call callus tissue there, and should start to, you know, seal over that crack. If it's having issues with that over time, that's a sign that your tree's struggling. If it can't get that callus tissue to close in around the crack, then that's going to be a problem down the line. So, you know, the recommendation would be just your basic good practices for taking care of a tree. You know, keep it mulched, keep it watered once it gets hot. You know, once we start to hit late June, July, it starts to get hot and that tree's really needing a lot of water. Keep it well watered this year and nurse it through.
Yeah.
So.
The other thought that came to mind, I didn't look at the picture too close, but the other thought that came to mind was like included bark too. Like if that Japanese maple had two leaders that had come together, you get this area that doesn't really join. It looks like it's joined down, so that can also look like a crack.
That can look like a crack. That's true.
So take a look, Karen, too, and see what the leader is like on that tree. If it's just one leader going up, then it more than likely is probably a frost crack. But if you have two main kind of trunks on it, it also could be that it's
and that if it was a crack that's been caused by included bark, that would come from like a branch union area. I mean, that's where the included bark happens. Yeah. It's where you know, it's just maybe a narrow branch angle, and some of the bark gets kind of trapped in the crack between the two branches. So that's how you could check for that. Really, probably care for it would be the same, and the implications would be about the same, but if it was included bark, it would maybe suggest that branch union's kind of weak, and you may want to consider a little bit of pruning to relieve some weight on that stressed branch union. But
okay, so you answer her question. If it leafs out, she just needs to take care of it a little bit more because it is a little bit stressed.
Baby it a little this
year. If it doesn't leaf out, when do you give up on the plant and replant a new Japanese maple? And Japanese maples are just inherently going to crack because they have that thin bark. Yeah. And there's a few trees that are like that.
Yeah, there's a number of
and they are susceptible to winter damage, I think.
They are very much so. I've lost a few over the years that I totally attribute to winter damage. Yeah. Just it got too cold and they weren't hardy enough to handle that. I think for me, you know, it kind of goes back to some of the rules of pruning. You can take off a third of the foliage in one pruning. You know, as a general rule of thumb for most woody species, you can prune off 1/3 of the foliage in one pruning. If you've lost more than 1/3 of the foliage, it's kind of the same thing. We're starting to get into that area where, if you've lost half your foliage, I'd say you're maybe better off to start with a new plant as opposed to try and nurse that along. So that's some rough guidelines.
It's gonna take forever for it to, and if it ever does look the same again, trees are hard to, you know, get back that beautiful shape.
Yeah, Japanese maples are tough. Most trees have a transplanting shock for a year or two, maybe 3. I almost feel like they have almost like a 5-year transplant shock period, that it's like you've got to get past that and get them well established. And once they get well established, a lot of times they do okay. But I just always worry when I plant one that, you know, for at least the next 5 years, I'm going to need to watch it and worry about it.
They seem to do best in almost like a protected area. Like you see them a lot of times at someone's like front door or front landscaping where it's kind of protected by a garage, or it's kind of in like a sheltered area. Those seem to be, to me, the best looking ones.
Yeah, a sheltered spot is best. Another thing, I've never read literature that confirms this, but I tend to kind of theorize that they have a really shallow and kind of wimpy root system.
Yeah, I imagine that.
And that's from digging up dead ones, from what I could see.
Yeah, and we've got another question kind of related to that. Darla has a very small Japanese maple, a red select. They want to know, should I pot the plant up for a few years or put it in the ground now to mature to the shape I'm wanting? They're worried about winter burn. I would plant it, don't you think?
I would plant it, too.
Yeah, I think I would. And probably the main reason being it's going to be able to, again, root development is the key to getting out of that transplant shock. It's going to be able to send out more roots and develop a more extensive root system, not in a pot.
Yeah.
I think some of your concern is that it's young succulent growth that's more susceptible to winter damage. mean, you're always going to have that as part of the canopy of the tree.
That's so just a Japanese maple.
So the longer that you kind of nurse it along in a pot, I feel like the more you've nursed it along and not exposed it to normal conditions and the wind and the weather and everything outside. It needs to harden up, Yeah, so I think my recommendation would be I'm always shooting for that, getting a plant in the ground as soon as possible.
And you're still gonna have to baby it and protect it and do all those things, but I think you're better off in the ground too.
And if you have one in a susceptible spot in the wintertime, you can kind of provide some protection in the way of something temporary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of it's not the most attractive. Like what I've done in the past is just stacked up a couple of bales of straw. That doesn't look as attractive as you can put up a pretty good looking little temporary fence on some stakes that just is blocking the wind is what it's doing. Now, you wouldn't ever want that blocking structure to shade it in any way. So I always picture that kind of on the north side of the plant. If it was, say ideally your house would be blocking the south winds.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe you add some of that protection to the north side or to the windward side. Our prevailing wind, you can kind of guess in central Illinois is from the southwest or the south. So that's the direction you need to protect the most, although some of those north winds are the coldest ones when we do get the...
So I'm going to translate for Ryan really quick. Don't put it out in the middle of a field.
Or just in the
middle of the yard. Put it closer to your house.
Yep.
And water it.
That's some basic rules to follow.
I think a lot of people, when they
Japanese
first plant trees or even perennials, they think, oh, it's a perennial, it's a woody plant, I don't have to water it. No. You have to water it in the beginning.
That first year is essential.
It isn't until it's established that you maybe have to back off of the watering a little bit, but still, when it's 90 degrees and we have drought, it doesn't matter how established that plant is, you've got to water it.
Yeah.
And that comes back to the thought that they kind of have a wimpy root system.
They do.
And wimpy root, that was my third one. Wimpy root system.
So that just tells me that I really don't want any other plants close to it competing. I want a nice mulch layer protecting the roots. It maybe even helps going into winter to add a little extra mulch to insulate it a little more so you don't have any of those roots freezing.
Keep the moisture. So. Very good. Keep those questions coming in the comment box. We've got another woody question here. The best time to trim boxwoods? When should we trim boxwoods?
My preference is dormancy for those.
Yeah.
They're evergreen, so it's misleading.
Yeah.
That during the wintertime they are in dormancy. So with respect to health of the plant, that's probably the best time you can do it with the least disruption.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think about all the different diseases and things that get on boxwoods.
Yeah, you're seeing boxwood in the news a lot lately because it was kind of a tough winter on boxwood.
It was. I've observed a lot of winter burn on boxwoods this year. I guess recently in the there's a great article in just the most recent Home Yard Garden and Pest newsletter.
I'll put it on my Facebook page.
About boxwood blight and look-alike diseases. And I guess one of the takeaways I got from that article, it was a great one, if you folks can look it up, is just that there's a lot of diseases that impact boxwood if you look at their list of lookalikes, and that's just the lookalikes. But I think another takeaway on boxwood blight, if you guys have heard about that or seen it in the news, it's been detected in Illinois. I actually just talked with the plant clinic, with Diane Pleva at the plant clinic this week about that. We've had about a dozen detections in Illinois, but probably the take-home message on that is that most of these were in nursery production areas. It really hasn't taken off in the home landscape. It hasn't just spread plant to plant and been a problem and just come about from nowhere.
Which is good.
And any infection we've had in Illinois, they've traced it back to the planting stock. So I think probably the best recommendation with boxwoods is to really inspect your planting stock before you plant it. Maybe even have a little bit of a quarantine period for the growing season where you can watch it. Again, that article has some great guidelines on detecting it.
We just posted it in the comments, so make sure you check that out.
So if you have winter burn on your boxwood, can you trim off those ugly brown leaves?
I usually recommend waiting into the growing season because there's times that those leaves have died and they're brown and dead, but the stem is still alive and can push out some new growth. And so I would say probably by this point of the growing season, you probably should be starting to see some green buds or some green leaves coming out on that stuff that's dead. But on an evergreen that I think has had winter burn, I always wait until, it's maybe June when I start to kind of prune out that dead. I know it's hard to let it sit there and fester for that long.
Well, a lot of it is probably starting to fall off at that point too, especially more other evergreens. The needles just tend to drop a lot of times.
So, I mean, I guess it all comes back to, whether it's a limb that you really want to keep or not. If you're okay with that limb not being part of the shrub anymore, and again, you're within that kind of 1/3, prune it off now and just know that there may have been a little life left in it that you've taken out, but...
as long as you got enough other green, then you should be good. Yeah. So, Sallie, I would say if you can wait till the dormant season to do it.
That would be best. Sorry, back to our original question. We got a little off track here. That would be best, but if you want to prune it this summer, that's okay too, as long as they're healthy-looking shrubs. You probably want to wait till about the end of June or so is usually my recommendation, because that's allowed the plant to kind of get going for the growing season, kind of send out some new shoots, get some photosynthesis back from all of its leaves, and it's kind of up and going for the season, and it can stand to have some of its energy producing area, its leaf area, taken away.
And Sallie, I'll say I do a lot of pruning on my boxwoods in December because I use a lot of them for wreaths, so that's kind of my time of year, like, I'm going to use this or something else, time to prune the boxwoods. So if you want, you can wait till then and do them on all your containers, all your winter decor. Boxwoods great.
Yeah, a lot of my evergreens got pruned for that reason.
Exactly. All of my use, that's the time of year.
I refuse to do holiday decor anymore.
I still do.
Burnt out.
Yeah. Great question. Okay, we've got a question here from Malik. How to maintain marigolds and carnations, I think is what they're asking about here. So if you're talking about marigolds and carnations, let's say for a cut flower, really it's pretty low maintenance. You're gonna plant your plants either by seeds or transplants, and then really watering is really your main task. When it gets dry, you want to make sure they're getting that inch of water per week. And if you're just growing them for a landscaping plant, really kind of same thing. Make sure they're watered. And
wouldn't you, for like a landscape plant, you want to pinch out the old flowers?
Yeah, you want to deadhead it as those fade.
But when you grow it for cut flower, wouldn't you pinch off the side buds?
Yeah, so if I'm going to grow, let's say like a marigold for a cut flower, I'm actually going to plant them pretty close together. So I grow marigolds sometimes in my raised beds for cut flowers, and I plant them much closer than what I would normally in a landscape bed, because when they're crowded together, they're going to grow taller and longer stems, which is what I want for cut flowers. And like you said, you're going to remove some of that side growth so that you get longer stems. But in a landscape bed, they're gonna bush out and kind of get bigger, so you allow them more space to do.
So with marigolds, it seems like, in my experience, like relatively few disease issues.
Really, there's not.
Ever had.
I mean,
they are so easy.
Yeah, and carnations, fairly easy too. They're in the dianthus family. With those, you just want to make sure. I would avoid a spot that's too wet, kind of a poorly drained site. Dianthus don't tend to love that, but. Otherwise, you should be pretty good. Let us know if you want anything more specific.
Okay, let me tell you a tip. I have a little bit of time. Let me tell you. I promise I won't talk too long. Let me tell you a tip. And this kills gardeners when I tell them to do this. Uh-oh. Okay, I'm planting annuals in a bed. I pinch off all the flowers.
At planting
Every single flower gets pinched off. Mm-hmm. When I plant it. Now, a lot of people are like, how would you take the flower away?
You're paying for those flowers.
Or they want quick, beautiful plants. Mm-hmm. They have a barbecue that Sunday, and they want, it to all be all pretty. Then, yeah, I agree. You probably wouldn't want to pinch the flowers off. But I promise you, if you pinch the flowers off at time of planting, again, what does the plant do? The plant is trying to keep those flowers going. Mm-hmm. You take the flowers away, the plant goes, okay, I'm going to put my energy into roots. Okay, you want good roots, you get good shoots, you get more flowers. So it'll delay your flowering 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but you'll have much prettier landscape if you do that at the time of planting.
I think
it hurts, but it's going to be worth it in the end.
I think one thing that maybe ties into that too is to not pick the plant that's in full bloom at the garden center.
Yeah.
To force yourself to pick one that's not.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to do too, but then you've got that opportunity to force more root growth and not have a plant that's wasted half its energy on flowering already.
Exactly, and it's probably pot bound because it's been in the pot longer, and it's
I always go, oh, that's a pretty flower. Now let me find something that hasn't flowered yet, and then that's what I'm going to
one that's totally green.
Yep.
That's what I'm usually looking for.
Awesome. Great questions, guys. We've got about 10 minutes left, so keep those coming in if you got more. Steven asked earlier, he's got a poorly drained part of his yard, and both of our neighbors and us get water in their basements. One solution is installing a drainage pipe, but he's worried that cutting a trench will severely impact a mature walnut tree. Are there rules of thumb about trenching near trees? Any techniques to minimize damage?
Well, the thing you can maybe think about is that an established walnut tree, so I don't know if does it say if it's a mature or immature?
I would assume
mature. I'm picturing like a mature shade tree probably has three times.
Yeah, he was mature,
three times the spread of the canopy in root growth.
Yeah.
Their roots really extend far beyond the drip line of the canopy. So when you cut that trench, you've essentially cut off all the roots on the other side of it. So think about what proportion of that root system you're cutting off. And I think that's where I kind of go back to, again, this kind of 1/3 rule with woody vegetation. If you're taking out more than 1/3 of that, what you could estimate to be that root system, then maybe that's a little close to the tree. Obviously, the closer you get to the trunk, the more of that you're severing. So I don't know that there's really a standard setback from the trunk, for the diameter or anything, but I would say the further you can space that trench that you would cut from the trunk, the better, obviously. So it's really kind of a judgment call. I might suggest that you consult an arborist before you go that route if you're worried about your tree. And the International Society of Arboriculture has a list of certified arborists for your area. Probably the easiest way to find that is through their website, treesaregood.com. And then there's a little button you click, find an arborist. And then under that, you can search within your geographic area for certified arborists. Those folks should be trained and qualified to make that decision with you. There's probably a lot of things they can recommend that in the event you do cut that trench, there's all these things we can do to kind of help the tree along after that. So
awesome. Yeah, and Lauren says she's doing a similar thing with her drainage. But yeah, I would definitely contact a couple of professionals, get a couple opinions.
And another thing to think about is not only just the cutting of the trench, but the traffic on the root system that's associated with that.
Yeah.
So that's another thing you can really work to minimize and just isolate that disturbance to the area the trench is being cut. Don't let the contractor, whomever it is, drive all over the root system of the plant, because that's having a further impact.
Certainly.
So just to demonstrate drip line.
Oh.
Tree. You're a beautiful
tree.
Tomato tree. Drip line. Where the rain drips off the tree leaves right here. But Ryan says your tree roots go out like this.
Yeah.
That's why when you just water in here, you're not watering all the roots. You have to water this much. And some people say put your mulch ring that big. But however, for your mature walnut, your mulch ring would probably be the entire backyard.
More than likely.
Yeah,
so
it just gets
think,
unreasonable.
you have a lot of roots. So think about how big that canopy of the tree. So drip line, probably 3 times.
Yeah. But if you're this far out and you're only cutting on a one kind of side, then you're probably going to be okay.
Yep,
so
I agree.
It really depends how close
another thing to understand about the drip line and watering is that it's really right at the edge of that drip line where the biggest concentration of roots are. So when you're looking at where do you get the most bang for your buck in watering a mature tree, it's really at the outer fringe of that drip line and just beyond it, because the foliage actually intercepts a lot of rainfall and smaller rain events. So think about that as you're strategizing how you're going to water.
If that trench is going to go right below the drip line, that's probably not great.
Yeah.
That would be, you'd be losing a lot of root hairs there. Yeah. Okay, we've got about 5-ish minutes left, and we've got 2 questions here. So let's see what we've got. Kathy, can you suggest plants for a northern exposure foundation of a house, lots of shade from the nearby house on the east. They have 3 upright yews that were split, and they had to remove those. So I'd like to stay with native to southern Illinois.
Oh.
North exposure, foundation, native to southern Illinois.
Man, she just killed me with native.
Yeah.
I love native plants.
Me too.
So I'm assuming just another shrub would be.
I would imagine if it's a foundation planting, a lot of times you're going to go for shrubs, just
and
because
she said it was shade.
Lots of shade.
You know, one that I like in the shade that's native is spice bush. It's a good one for shade.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't have a real exciting flower display, but it's very early in the season is one of the things I like about it. I mean, maybe start of March around here, so
is
probably
spice bush
early March
native?
for southern Illinois.
Native foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's native.
Nice.
So can I make a suggestion? Not native to southern Illinois, native to the southern eastern part of the United States. My favorite shrub for shade is Fothergilla.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
love Fothergilla. Mine's
a good
flowering
one.
right now.
oh, it's flowering. Beautiful plant. Just stunningly beautiful plant. Has beautiful flowers, really cool, interesting looking leaves, and then it has a good fall color.
Cool.
And it grows in shade to partial. It grows in partial shade. You'll get, if you did it in full shade, you would get less flowers and less of that beautiful fall color. But oh man, I love this plant for shade.
And what an awesome looking flower. I mean, it's just
It's
a
like a
weird,
big ball of.
It's
like a little
goofy ball of
It's
flower.
like a brush that you wash your dishes with, like what
a
a bottle
bru-
brush.
A brush that I wash my bottles with.
A bottle brush.
A little bottle brush. A little tiny. Oh, so beautiful. And it's been in bloom for a while now.
Yeah.
Mine's. I planted my plant maybe a year ago, and it's still a little small. Needs to still in its little transplant area. But it is just covered in little white flowers. It's gorgeous. I love it.
Yeah, and if you had a little bit of sun coming through, I would probably do, again, not native, but like an oak leaf hydrangea.
Oh, yeah.
I had, on the north side of my last house, I had an oak leaf hydrangea, and it was perfect.
Yeah, I do really like that plant.
Yeah.
Oak leaf hydrangea is one of my favorites.
So, yeah, so I would go for some shrubs, what'll tolerate the shade, and see how you do.
But I agree in taking out those yews.
Yeah, definitely. You don't,
We have too many of them.
Okay, our last question of the day. Oh, a suggestion for epimedium in dry shade.
Yes,
That's a good
nice
suggestion,
one.
Sue. Very good. Okay, last question today, if I can get it to come up. Darla, what type of soil amendment in pure clay would I need for ostrich fern? Soil amendment in pure clay for ostrich fern.
Compost?
Yeah, any type of organic matter was what I would say, whether that's compost or leaf compost, mushroom, whatever type of organic matter you can get.
Just across the board, boosting the organic in a soil is going to
improving
really
that soil
things.
texture,
benefit drainage, nutrient holding capacity, nutrient cycling, all those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool. So yeah,
that
get
would
some
definitely
soil
loosen that soil up. I always say, if the compost is made out of plants, it's a soil conditioner, which means it loosens the soil up for the roots. If it's made out of animals, then it's supplying more nutrients for them to. Now this is I'm gonna get on my. How many minutes do I have?
You're done. So make it a short
Okay.
soapbox.
When you add plant food in the form of nutrients, it's not food. Plants do this amazing thing. They make their own food from the sun.
It's magical.
They just use those nutrients to help them make that food. So calling it plant food is kind of crazy for people like us. It's like the telephone pole.
Yeah.
But
think of it as the vitamin.
Yes,
Yeah, there
it is.
Vitamins
It's more like vitamins.
It's a supplement. It's not the food.
So when you're adding the animal compost, you are loosening up the soil. It is conditioning the soil and adding organic matter, but it is supplying nutrients that help the plants make their food. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox.
Excellent. Good advice, Kelly. Well, thank you everyone for the awesome questions today. You guys had them coming strong the whole hour, so we love that. So thanks for joining us. We will be back again in June. So keep writing down those gardening questions, and we'll address those in our next Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. Thanks, everybody.